now, so we're going to plunge ahead into today's meeting, which, as you know, is about core reference. And we're going to be talking largely about Google. We'll also be talking a little bit about search engines in general and the most effective uses that we can make of them, especially when we think that they may be the most efficient route to an authoritative answer, and in fact, the amount of efficiency involved in getting there it makes them not the most efficient in the world. So what we'll be covering is information that comes directly from Google Search, which is an element of the Google Corporation. They have an inside search education module, and we'll be looking at that. We'll be talking about Google habits of both your users, your soon-to-be users, and maybe even of yourselves. We're going to be talking about how to build better searches using Google specifically, but that can also help you in building better searches with other search engines as well. We'll talk a little bit about moving beyond Google, and then at the end there will be 15 minutes, which should be time for both discussion and questions. If you have questions in the meantime, go ahead and enter them in the chat box, and Nancy will try to catch them and bring them to my attention when we get to that part of the agenda. Okay? So here we go. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the search education feature that's available in Google. This is something that is not new to Google. They've had it available for quite some time, but they have recently reconditioned it, and it now is in a much more fulsome way. So what I'm going to do right now is take you, as soon as I can find where you have all gone, I'm going to take you into them on my screen. So I will be sharing the screen with you, and we're going to take a look at some of the features available. Can you all see my screen? Can you raise your hands if you can? Okay, Danielle can see it. Can anyone else see it? Okay, so only 2 of you can see it?
Francisca, I think some of them may be struggling to find their participants lists at the moment. You might want to repeat that part. Okay,
I'm asking if you can see the screen that I'm sharing with you. Good, okay, you can all put your hands down now that we've had that little practice with rolling your mouse over that green bar. And I'm going to draw your attention to some of the things that are available at the Google Search Education home. This is actually a destination that is planned for people who teach how to use Google, and that could be in a classroom for middle school or high school students. It could be in an academic library where you're training new students to college or university in how to make the best use of a search engine. But it also has a lot of information that you yourself might want to check out. When we click here on lesson plans, we'll see that there are plans here in a variety of things, such as picking the right search terms, understanding search results, narrowing a search. But what is also very, very helpful is that there are actually lessons for different types of users. So you probably are not a beginner. You may probably not even be an intermediate user. You may be an advanced user. So if you're using this for yourself, you want to determine, first of all, what type of user you are. It will give you an idea of what the lesson is going to cover, what resource materials you might need, how long it will take to take the lesson. and then details of the lesson. I'm not suggesting that you start using Google instead of anything else by a long shot, but what I am indicating to you is that instead of taking on the method which so many people have become accustomed to using, which is simply going to Google and entering whatever key term comes to mind and doing a search like that, that you start thinking about the fact that there is a lot of help available to you that can bring you up to speed in doing much more advanced searching. Also at this Google Search Education site, there's something called live trainings. Now, even though usually when we think of people who are live, we think of them showing up in the flesh and blood, or at least being, as we are now, in a webinar where we are in the same moment of time talking about the same thing. But in fact, there are a lot of archived webinars here. So that's another aspect of this Google Search Education that you might want to take on for yourself. Okay. I'm going to stop searching, stop sharing for a moment, and we'll move on to the next item here. Let's talk about those typical Google habits. How many of you ever use Google with anything except a simple search? Just dumping in a word, that's a simple search. Okay, and those of you who have your hands up, you're accustomed to using Google with an advanced search. How many of you use advanced search regularly? Okay, I have Sabrina and Colleen and Christina. You all use advanced search, and James. Great. Okay. So we're going to talk about advanced search. We're also going to talk about, even in a simple search, you can put your hands down now, how even in a simple search, there are tips and tricks to use, such as scanning the first screen's results, but maybe thinking about that there are other screens too. The fact that many of us have gotten into the habit, because of Google Ads, of prematurely dismissing the top-ranked relevancy links, and also the fact that most people do neglect the most efficient options that they could be using. So now I'm going to go back to sharing the screen, and this time we're going to be looking at Google Advanced Searching. And I'll be sharing the screen in just a minute. Back up here and share my screen with you. Okay, here in the advanced search, unlike a simple search, there are many, many possibilities for tightening up how our searching is going to play out. For instance, we can put in all the words that we want to search. We can put in just a specific word or phrase that we want to make sure is in that search. We could do both of these things. We can also, if we have something like the death penalty and criminal punishment, we might want to put in both death penalty and criminal punishment in any of these words search. And that way we don't have to do two simple searches, one with criminal punishment, with capital punishment, and the other with death penalty. We could also enter something with none of these words. So for instance, if we're interested in the death penalty, but we're not interested in looking at book reviews or movie reviews about the death penalty, we could put in the word review in this none of these words. And that way none of the responses that we get would in fact be just movie or book reviews. We might want to find something that's very brief, We might want to find something that's very long. We might want to find something that's just in between, like 5 to 10 pages, so we can enter that as well. Here where it says any language, you might be willing to put in a language other than your own if you're working with a patron who actually wants it in another language. You might, though, want to reserve that to show to a user rather than trying to figure out in Icelandic whether the particular item that you've looked up is scholarly or not, and we'll be getting to that in a moment. This site or domain is one of the most important things to keep in mind when you're doing an advanced Google search, and you don't need to be at this advanced page in order to do that. You can do that from the simple search page, and what is handy about this is by simply putting in the specific site, or at least the domain, such as .gov for a government website, you will cut down tremendously on the hits that you get back. And for instance, if you were doing something on health and wellness and limited it to just a government site, .gov, you would know immediately that what you were getting back was authoritative. You wouldn't be getting any dross that you had to winnow your way through to come to the wheat. Terms appearing, do you want them to be anywhere on the page, or are you much more interested in them being part of the title, part of the URL of the page, or in the links to the page? Safe search is something that you probably want to check to see how your library is set up. Is it linked already to being very strict in its searching so that it won't pick up any questionable terms? Is it moderate so that it will pick up breast, as in breast cancer? Or is there no filtering whatsoever, in which case if you're doing an image search with a user, you might want to be a little bit careful about what images are pulled up with some words. Reading level is actually something that is a huge, huge help in this advanced search. For instance, if you're only interested in showing results that have a pretty basic literacy level, you can set it to that. And that way you won't be pulling in scholarly papers for a third grader. The usage rights you probably do want to discuss with students, because there are many things on the internet that Google will point you to that are copyrighted, and so the person will have to know how to cite it properly. Okay, I'm going to once again stop screen sharing with you, and we're going to go back to the slides. Sometimes we do dismiss those top relevance ranked links because of the ads, but one of the things that you might want to keep in mind when you're doing a basic Google search is that you can collect more information than the patron may have been able to tell you, even with a good reference interview. Especially if it's a child, he or she might not have quite the vocabulary to give you all the possible synonyms with which you could be searching. So by looking at those very top ranked links, even if they're ads, you may be able to build out a vocabulary that will help you when you turn to other sources. Some of the ways that you can build those better searches we've just gone over, and those include using the advanced search, also using filters. When you're already in a Google search, and I'm just going to search once again for giraffes, and then I'll share my screen with you. When I'm in giraffes or anything else that I've done in a simple search, one of the things that you can see over on the left is a filtering system. So I can be looking at everything. I can be looking only at maps of where giraffes might be located. I can be looking for news about giraffes. Let's see what more is available. A lot more is available. And whenever you see a pull-down list like that, be sure to see what your other options might be. If I wanted recipes, for instance, which sounds very scary, but maybe it's about giraffe food, I could find them here as well. And one thing that I would find interesting is looking for blogs that are about giraffes. So I don't think that's going to bring back a whole lot. It doesn't on the first page, but it does bring back thousands. So once again, we could go into the mode of what does this first page, the first few hits tell us, and the first few tell us things like what other animals I might want to think about looking at. It tells us that let's see, mending, which makes sense to me because mending books and mending garments for small children would both probably take in a lot of giraffes. I can also filter by when this site last came up, and now you see that we're down to blogs that were updated in the last 10 minutes. That's certainly putting a severe stricture on it. Now, while that won't be helpful for probably, I hope, too many of your own personal reference questions, it is something for you to keep in mind. Beyond Google, let's talk a little bit first about what a search engine is. Google is a search engine. It's not a site. So if a user or I ask you what you use to find an answer and your answer is Google, you haven't really answered the question. What you've done is you've told me how you got to what you used to answer the question. In your supplemental materials for this week, there is something called the Search Engines Tool page, and it actually comes directly from the InfoPeople site, and it's a description of how different search engines like Bing, like Dogpile, like Yahoo work, what each of them has as a limitation, what each of them has as a strength, and so on and so forth. One of the things, though, that this can't tell you is anything beyond search engines. And search engines are really, really helpful for answering some questions, but they won't get at what we call the deep web. And the deep web isn't searchable by the spiders that web engines use. So in order to locate them, what we need to do is go to a directory or some other site. And I'm going to share now the desktop while we look at the Internet Public Library. And the Internet Public Library has been around for about 20 years. The Internet Public Library has also been merged with the former Librarians Index to the Internet. So it's a place where you can look for online information which may or may not be discoverable on the web, the open web. This is a directory as opposed to a search engine, so we can explore it in many ways, including in this big open search box, but also by going to something that's much more specific to our needs and working our way down in to find online sources that are not necessarily websites. Now, the difference between online sources and websites, of course, are that online sources may or may not be crawlable by the spider that goes out from any one particular search engine or another. An online source, however, is brought to us online, whether or not it can be crawled by that spider. If you're concerned about what's going to happen at the end of this when you're trying to remember everything, don't be, because when Nancy puts up the archives from this meeting, It will also include a list of the bookmarks of the places where we went today. The most important thing to remember, however, when we're asked a reference question is there are many questions that aren't appropriate to search on the internet at all. For instance, during this week or last week when we've been talking about special collections that each of your libraries holds, many of the answers that you've come back with are ones that can't be found by searching the internet. They're not there if we used a search engine. They're not there if we were able to get into the invisible web or into databases beyond your own libraries. Sometimes a database, a subscription database, which is something that you're going to be talking about this week in the course, will be moderately helpful, but sometimes what you need is either a book or another agency. So when you are thinking about responding to those questions, think broader than just search engines. Okay, we've come to the portion of this presentation where we can have both discussion and questions. I know that two of you were earlier I guess last week, confounded when I sent you off to post your discussion about Dogpile on the open forum, and I discovered today there is no open forum in this course. I think that was a mistake, and you will find it has arrived back at the site, and you will be able to take your Dogpile discussion there. But right now, if you've got other things that you'd like to discuss, or if the two of you are here and want to talk about Dogpile, I think James, you were one of them, and I think Gary was the other, that would be fine too. So if you do have question or comment, please go ahead and raise your hand, and either Nancy will unmute you, or if you don't have access to being able to speak into a microphone, you can input questions and comments in the chat box, and we can look at them there together.
Hi, this is Nancy. I was just going to let people know, too, they can unmute themselves by clicking on the little microphone with the slash through it next to their names, to the right of their names.
It would be good, though, if you didn't unmute yourself until you've raised your hand and we call on you, just for all that ambient noise.
Yes, sounds good. Sounds good.
Any comments or questions, folks? Okay, Suzanne. Kristen.
Hey, Suzanne, I unmuted you.
You can go ahead and speak.
Suzanne, are you there? I don't hear her. Anyone else? Francisca?
Yeah, I don't see anybody else's hand. No one else has any comment? Question? Well, maybe the shortest meeting on record. Okay, Joan, yes.
Joan.
Hello?
Hi, Joan.
Oh, hi. Thank you. I just needed, if you could just review what you were talking about, simple searches, which I've done mostly, and advanced searches. So where do you click on to go to the advanced search if you just go straight to Google?
If you were to go straight to Google, you'll see a little symbol underneath the Google and the open box, and it says advanced. Just click on it.
Okay. And if not, should you go to a different site?
No, it is Google. Okay. Google is an enormous entity, and they try to keep it simple at the beginning by just giving you that one box.
Right.
But there's a ton of stuff underneath that one box, and that's what I'm hoping you start looking at, is the ton of stuff that's underneath.
Okay.
If we're answering people's questions just with simple Google searches, we're not really providing any value. A lot of people can do their own simple Google searches. They don't need us to do that.
Right.
So the part of the point of this course, and definitely a point of today's meeting, is to talk about how to enhance what folks can do for themselves with more skillful and more authoritative sources. It looks like Suzanne was able to text her question. I was going to ask, when do you choose to work with subscription databases versus Google searching? Certainly, it depends on what the question is in terms of, is it something that's in a database that I own at my library? Is it something that I need authoritative information that can be cited quickly, that comes from books or other material that were previously published or brought together by that database? Google searching isn't something that I do a whole lot when I'm talking about answering reference questions. Google's really good for getting news. It's good for helping me figure out how to spell somebody's surname who's in the news if it's a tricky spelling. But perhaps, Suzanne, you'd like other people to answer this question as well. So maybe some of the really experienced people in the audience, and I know we've got quite a number of them, James or Nancy Herrera, do one of you want to talk about a little bit about when you use databases versus when you use some of your Google searching methods? James, do you want to take that one on? James?
Are you talking to Joan or James?
James.
Oh,
and
James says he doesn't have a mic.
Ah, James doesn't have a mic. Okay. Well, how about if you write your response? And Nancy, do you have a mic? Nancy Herrera? Nancy, do you want to talk a little bit about when you use databases versus search engines?
I had muted her, but I'm not sure if she's got a mic either. But I do see a comment from Elizabeth.
Yeah, I do too. I'm just going to suggest first that Nancy, if you don't have a mic, if you too could enter some text so that we get other people's points of view here. Elizabeth, you asked about Dogpile. Dogpile is a meta search engine. It's one of several. And basically what it does is it looks at Google and Yahoo and other search engines all at the same time. I would not recommend using it if you're not expert already at building good searches in a single search engine, whether it's Bing or Google or Yahoo or anything else. It's basically, that would be the analog of deciding that you couldn't find shoes at the shoe store, so you went to a department store that had a whole bunch of departments besides shoes looking for them instead of winnowing yourself down to what kind of shoes you really wanted. And I see here that James is saying that he uses Google for spelling or for looking for authors' websites. That's a great use of it, James. And he uses EBSCO to find specific journals, information that's inside specific journals. And Suzanne is saying, so maybe returning through Google to sites I've been to before, or simple facts and dates. I'm not sure what returning to Google means. But yes, if you have already found specific sites that you like, and you can't quite remember the URL, but almost. It helps if you remember some part of the URL, and definitely you'll need to remember the domain. And then if you go into the advanced search and at least put in those factors into the domain site searching. Simple facts and dates, you need to be careful. Depends on what site you're going to when you're using Google. Remember, Google isn't a site itself, it's a search engine. Denise is saying, of the types of information that Google can reliably supply, is Google the best of the bunch? Are any of the competitors just as good or even better in some regards? Yes, other ones are just as good or better in some regards and worse in some regards. Google has deep pockets, and Google is the current popular one. Do you remember about 10 years ago when Yahoo was the popular one? So these are partly it is driven by popularity and partly it's driven by budget. But definitely things like Bing, for instance, which will be listed on the list that you'll get along with these archives, does a much better job of aggregating social media information than Google does. Now, that might not be very useful for most reference questions that you're doing, but it certainly could be more helpful in other regards. Something like Yahoo, for instance, has a much more child-friendly interface than does Google. So when you're thinking about a search engine that children might find copable, and I mean young children, I'm talking about under 8, then Yahoo is probably a better bet for you. And then there are other search engines that do a much, much better job with scholarly material than does Google. Do we have other people who have microphones who'd like to speak? Let's see. Somebody just raised a hand. Joan, do you want to speak again?
Sure. I was just going to say, for the online databases that we have at our library, I use a lot of, and some of them have advanced searches, like Biography USA, and we have Medline now that we just got, and Social Studies Card Facts for kids, to supplement like state mission reports and other things. I find is a really good source.
Yeah, advanced searching in a database and advanced searching with a search engine, the words are the same and they do some of the same actions, but you're not going to get the same results. Very quickly, a review for everyone. The World Wide Web has resources on it that are put on by a lot of different entities in a lot of different order using a lot of different protocols. We can search those using search engines. A database, on the other hand, is a collection of resources. It may be a collection of websites even, in which case it would be a directory, but a database is limited in scope and everything that's in it is ordered by the same set of protocols. So for instance, if you're going to use advanced search in a database, you're still going to wind up what's inside that database. It's not going to take you out into the world. But a database can be way more helpful than going out into the world if you know that what you want are subscription contents that you won't be able to get out in the world unless you pay for them a second time, such as looking for reviews in Consumer Reports. You can get some Consumer Reports reviews free online, but you're not going to be able to read the whole magazine cover to cover unless you pay for an online subscription or your library subscribes to a database that includes Consumer Reports full text within it. Elizabeth, I think she was referring to the Gale biography database. So in that case, Biography USA, yes, it would only be by subscription, but there are a lot of biography sites, including some database sites that are out on the free and open web. What we'll have to do with those, of course, is review them to make sure that they're authoritative, and that is the sum and substance of next week's work, is learning how to recognize and review the authority of any particular site. Did someone else have a hand up? Suzanne, did you have another remark, or have you just not taken down your hand yet? Suzanne Christman, that is. Okay. Thanks, Suzanne. Sorry to put you to sleep. Okay, then. I think we'll wrap this up then if nobody else has any remarks. When helping people in general, do you broach the subject of trustworthiness of sites much? You have to, absolutely. It's part of your job. We as reference providers are helping people understand the information that we're giving them. And part of the information that we're giving them is whether it's trustworthy or not. So yeah, that would be a #1 part of the training aspect of answering the reference question, is walking people through why. Okay, it looks like as soon as I try to pack this up, people do have things to say. Okay, well, there is also going to be an adjunct discussion forum that's linked to the archives for this meeting, and you certainly should feel welcome, and I hope you will participate in that discussion forum as well. You've been a really, really wonderful bunch of discussants in our various forums each week, so I hope that will carry over into this webinar's discussion forum attachment. And as I said, the archives of the recording and the slides will also come with some links for you to look at that we looked at during the course of this meeting. So you will be able to go back and look at them more deeply and as much as you like. Okay? Anything else that anybody would like to add before we bring the recording to a close? And Nancy is letting us all know that the archive will be up in the next 2 or 3 hours. You will find it in the same place where you linked to the meeting today. It will be available to you there, and it will be cleverly marked archives.